We begin with this Fox News alert, and we are awaiting the final round of questioning in President Trump's impeachment trial in the Senate, ahead of a showdown expected over whether to call impeachment witnesses, with a vote expected tomorrow. Republicans have reportedly become more confident that they do in fact have enough votes to block Democrats' push for witness testimony, as Senate Republicans say it is time to put the trial behind them.
I'm increasingly optimistic that Republicans will move to a final verdict before Tuesday. We're not blocking anybody's witnesses. We're just not going to legitimize the House choosing not to call a witness.
It's time to move to a vote on acquittal as soon as possible.
I think we've all heard enough. I believe people are tired. I think both Republicans and Democrats are tired of this.
I'm ready to go to final judgment. I don't see a need for any additional witnesses.
It's been a busy morning because just a short time ago, Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer also said that the stakes of that vote could not be higher.
The fate of much of the future of how this republic conducts itself is on the shoulders of 4 Republicans. I believe Senate Republicans and the president's team are worried about the vote.
Meanwhile, Senator Chris Van Hollen is planning to force a vote tomorrow on a motion requiring Chief Justice Roberts subpoena witnesses and documents he deems relevant and rule on any claims of executive privilege. Let's get started. This is Outnumbered. I'm Harris Faulkner. Here today, Melissa Francis, Fox News contributor Lisa Booth, Fox News contributor Jessica Tarlov, and in the center seat, the chairman of GOPAC, David Avella, is with us. On a big day, as they all seem to be, you're outnumbered. Great to have you today.
Glad to be back.
I want to get your top line thoughts on what's unrolling as we hit the last day of questioning.
More Democrats will vote to acquit the president than Republicans will vote for witnesses. Democrats want this over as much as Republicans. And the great irony about all of this is one of the men at the center of this whole kerfluffle is Joe Biden. And why is Joe Biden at the center of it? Because the Democrats think the president was getting some type of dirt on him to use in the election. And Joe Biden's going to be out of the presidential race in 2 weeks after Bernie Sanders beats him in Iowa and New Hampshire. And Donald Trump won't even be the one that beat him. Bernie Sanders will be.
Wow. You've given this some thought. We went someplace with this. Now, we saw Lindsey Graham.
Yeah.
And he actually had some pretty fiery things to say.
So he put it together very plainly, and you talked about what does this have to do with Joe Biden, and he said that he thinks that you would see John Bolton get up and testify to the fact that, yes, the president wanted to look into corruption and he wanted to look into the Bidens. And he said that there's every reason in the world to want to look into the Bidens, that his friend, this is Lindsey Graham saying this, Joe Biden stood up and said the time for corruption in the energy sector in Ukraine is over. He said that at the exact same time that his son was getting $3 million from the sector. He said that statement and his son's job undercut U.S. interests in the region very clearly. He said that's a legitimate line of concern, and he put it out there so plainly as to why the president would be looking into this.
The other thing I heard Senator Lindsey Graham saying, Jessica, which I think is important to the 2020 Democrat, rollout for Biden and everybody else, because it is kind of a re-roll once this is over, right? Because some of those senators we haven't seen much of because they're in the Senate. But for Joe Biden, what Senator Graham was saying, we can deal with this post-impeachment in the Senate trial. We can take a look at Joe and Hunter Biden. I mean, this could, as David was pointing to, this could be a real problem for Joe Biden. What is the DNC? What's the answer back from the party, do you think?
The answer back from the party is what you've heard Joe Biden saying on the campaign trail, because he isn't in the Senate, he's in Iowa and New Hampshire, which is that the president is scared of going up against me, which is why he did this, and I did nothing wrong. If you watched this week's defense from the Trump campaign, I honestly thought it was embarrassing for them. Pam Bondi is up there trying to impeach President Hunter Biden. Then you have Ken Starr seeming unaware of the fact that he's Ken Starr and did what he did in the 90s.
Can I just ask, it doesn't bother you if he stood up and he said the day for corruption in the energy sector in Ukraine is over, and at that exact moment his son was getting $3 million?
Because the timeline doesn't add up, and that's important. No, it actually doesn't.
At that moment, he was getting the money.
Joe Biden was making it harder, actually, for his own son by going after Shokin. The entire international community, all of the Western world, all the people that we are allies with wanted that prosecutor out. It's really important also that what Alan Dershowitz said yesterday, much like Mick Mulvaney, the quiet part out loud. There was a quid pro quo, and it was in the national interest, and that makes it okay, which is not true.
Corruption is over.
Do you honest? Hold on.
I want to get Lisa's voice in here. I miss the sound of your voice, Lisa.
Oh, thanks, Harris. I appreciate it. Look, I think all of this is irrelevant. I think, Michael, the Democrats have done an insufficient job of making their case, and Michael Purpura last Saturday, who's the White House Deputy Legal Counsel, made the most salient point I have heard to date. And what he said is there can't be a threat without the person knowing he's being threatened. There can't be a quid pro quo without the quo. And the point he was making is that all these witnesses have said that the Ukrainians weren't aware that money was being withheld until after that July 25th call took place. They weren't aware until the Political article that came out at the end of August. And you go down the list. You've got Bill Taylor saying that, Kurt Volker saying that, Tim Morrison saying that, George Kent saying that, Laura Cooper saying that, all of these witnesses saying that to their knowledge the Ukrainians weren't aware. So how was anything being leveraged if they weren't aware?
David,
that's ridiculous.
I want to come back to
the process to the vote is unknown. This outcome is known. There are not 20 senators who are going to vote to convict the president. So all of this show that we have until then, and I say show, because if this were in 2 weeks and Joe Biden were out of the presidential race, there wouldn't be a single Democrat that would vote for witnesses. And all this talk about Nancy Pelosi be a grand strategist, that's like saying the guy who floated the Titanic was a master boat captain.
Are you trying to say that the other Democrats want to get Joe Biden out of the race? Is that what you're saying? That if this were 2 weeks from now, they wouldn't want witnesses?
No, this all started, Melissa, remember, because they were concerned when Joe Biden was the front runner that somehow Donald Trump was going to do something to advantage himself against Joe Biden, who they want to be the nominee, at least the establishment of the Democratic Party, want him to be the nominee. And now that plan is all falling apart.
All right, I got to scoot to this, and I'll come right to you, Jessica. Senator Schumer yesterday was talking about the battle to get additional witness testimony. Take a look at this. Is this some kind of a preview of what's to come? Watch.
Now, I remain hopeful that 4 Republican senators will join us in supporting witnesses and documents in this trial. It's an uphill fight, as I've always said, but the public is on our side, and truth, above all, is on our side. And that's why we're still in the fight.
Is Senator Schumer there getting Democrats, getting everybody ready to see this not pass with the foregone conclusion that the majority will acquit the president, which is what's been said all along?
I think he's setting us up for what we saw from Chris Van Hollen, who is going to send that motion to get Chief Justice John Roberts to subpoena the witnesses because we're not going to get the 4 votes. I don't think that John Roberts wants to be involved in this. That's how I've seen it. He's kind of sitting back.
Well, it's not his job, right? Or
well, it is his job to preside over the trial.
He could do
that. That is within his rights.
Yes.
And it was very interesting. 2 nights ago, Political article, 9 p.m., Majority Leader McConnell doesn't have the vote to block witnesses. Then by the morning, suddenly he did. I thought yesterday the best question came from Senator Collins and Senator Murkowski, where they said, did the president mention Joe Biden and corruption before he was in this race? The answer from Trump's defense team was no. That means it was about his political opponent. And to you, David, Alan Dershowitz admitted there was a quid pro quo.
Can I go in on that? Because I think you were misstating. No. This is what he was saying. He was saying that, and also President Zelensky said that he wasn't aware aid was being withheld on that July 25th call, which would seem to be very important. But here's what Alan Dershowitz was saying. He said that you cannot impeach a president when there's some sort of mixed, when there's a mixed national security interest with a political interest, because if you make that argument, essentially any president could be impeached. For instance, President Trump froze aid from the Northern Triangle countries for a period of time. Immigration is part of his key platform. Should he then be impeached for that? Or any member of Congress who has fought for appropriations of money where it could benefit a key constituency or a donor, then should they be, should that be a political liability for
a great conversation, and I say this, I've been saying this all along with our coverage as we bump up against it at 12:30 p.m. Yeah. We've got an abbreviated noon show, so we're glad to have everybody. We will continue to hash it out. Keep watching, but we got to move. Newly unearthed video calling into question the credibility of John Bolton as Democrats push for the former national security advisor to testify in the impeachment trial. How the fight is shaping up ahead of tomorrow's vote on potentially calling witnesses. Whew.
No one from inside the White House or outside the White House told us that the publication of the book would be problematic for the president. I think we assumed that Mr. Bolton was disgruntled, and we didn't expect he was going to be saying a lot of nice things about the president, but no one told us anything like that.
All right, a member of the president's legal team yesterday as the battle with former National Security Advisor John Bolton heats up over claims in his upcoming book. The White House says Bolton's manuscript contains classified information and cannot go to press as is. Bolton's lawyer denies this and is demanding to know what information is in question. Democrats are saying Bolton must testify on what the president told him regarding military aid to Ukraine. Meantime, President Trump declaring game over, tweeting out a video of Bolton from late August interview where he makes no reference to any attempt at a quid pro quo with Ukraine. Here's a bit of that.
I will be meeting President Zelensky. He and President Trump have already spoken twice. President called to congratulate President Zelensky on his election and then on his success in the parliamentary election. They were very warm and cordial calls. We're hoping that they'll be able to meet in Warsaw and have a few minutes together.
We've got to get you to this breaking news, though. Adam Schiff is speaking right now in front of the microphones. Let's listen.
The integrity of our elections, as long as he thinks it's in his re-election interest, that's okay, and there's nothing that Congress can do about it. And what's more, if part of that quid pro quo involves an investigation of his political rival, the fact that his political rival is running for president gives it greater legitimacy, not less, because it would be more consequential. That is the most absurdly dangerous argument that could have been made. And the fact that they must resort to this level of desperation is the result of the fact that the House managers proved the defendant's scheme involved withholding of military aid, withholding of a coveted White House meeting with the president of Ukraine in order to coerce, to extort, to blackmail that country into conducting or announcing these sham investigations, to helping him cheat in the election. They went on to say that soliciting, inviting, coordinating foreign assistance in a U.S. election, notwithstanding what the FBI director says, or any self-respecting American says, that they view that as perfectly fine. It is the normalization of lawlessness. But that is what they've had to resort to as the evidence has continued to pile up of the president's guilt. And when that evidence threatened to get even greater with the testimony of John Bolton, they have gone to extraordinary lengths to put a muzzle on John Bolton, to avoid calling him as a witness, to avoid letting the American people hear what he has to say, to trying to stifle his book, to attacking him publicly, because they fear what he has to say, because they already know the president's scheme has been exposed. So that's where they are. We will continue today to make the case, a case that has already been made to the American people, but needs to be made to this Senate, and that is a fair trial requires witnesses. Fair trial, an impartial oath requires witnesses. And that's what they should deliver for the American people. No trial, no vindication. No vindication for the president or anyone else. The Constitution requires a fair trial, and that's all we're asking. Happy to respond to a couple questions.
Paul is teasing a 1 o'clock question he's going to ask regarding potentially the whistleblower involving their name. Do you have any thoughts on the appropriateness of that and what should be done perhaps by the Chief Justice?
Well, as I said yesterday, we protect whistleblowers. We need their cooperation. We need their support in making the country work. And I'm not talking specifically about this whistleblower. I'm talking about whistleblowers generally. We rely on people of good conscience to report misconduct. The only point in outing this whistleblower is to satisfy the desire of the president for retribution, and that is not something that this Senate should condone.
Some Republicans are pointing to the Steele dossier and defending Philbin's comments last night. Is that legitimate, saying that Hillary Clinton and the DNC were involved in the Steele dossier? pointing back to?
You know, honestly, going down the Steele dossier rabbit hole, I don't even understand what the logical connection is supposed to be. The president is on trial right now for withholding military aid from an ally at war, trying to coerce that ally into helping him cheat in the next election, and to continue, and that may gratify the president. Again, part of what the president's lawyers are doing isn't meant to persuade the senators. It's not meant to persuade the American people, and it isn't. It's meant to gratify the grievances of the president by talking about Christopher Steele or James Comey or Peter Strzok or Lisa Page. None of those people are responsible for the president's misconduct. Only Donald Trump is responsible for his misconduct, and he must be held to account. Thank you.
Will you still pursue John Bolton if tomorrow's vote fails?
Okay, so that was impeachment manager Adam Schiff there talking about how the Constitution requires witnesses and making the case, among other things, for why John Bolton needs to come and testify. Although he hasn't always been a huge fan of John Bolton, and he hasn't always had the most respect for him. Here's that same Adam Schiff back in 2005.
Particularly given the history where we've had the politicization of intelligence over WMD, why we would pick someone who the very same issue has been raised repeatedly, and that is John Bolton's politicization of the intelligence he got on Cuba and on other issues. Why we would want someone with that lack of credibility, I can't understand.
Credibility then. He has credibility now. Here's what kills me. Everybody on both sides, total hypocrites. Republicans, Democrats, they all do this. Someone is totally credible and necessary when it's going to help their case, and they're just a bold-faced liar when they're not on their side anymore.
Well, you know, that's been the sticking point with this whole process, is that it is more political than anything else. And I go back to Senator Lindsey Graham, who spoke earlier today for quite some time. And what he was talking about is, and I don't believe it was retaliatory, but I want to understand from David if it might have been. It was definitely a shot across the bow.
Yeah.
Wait until Republicans are in the position opposite a Democratic president. I'm paraphrasing him, but the spirit of what he said is right in these words. He said, look, you know, do you really want to start this? Do you want to go down this road? Is this how it's going to be? He said, if I'm in their shoes at that point, I'm hoping that I would take the high road.
I heard much of that also during the Clinton impeachment. Let's keep in mind with this whole deal with Ambassador Bolton that the New York Times is not the referee here. They are not an interested observer. They have a side that they are on. And we know about John Bolton's book from an excerpt that they've decided to give us. We don't know what the next page says. We don't know what John Bolton has said in this. And beyond that, you wonder, Democrats always in the last hour try to throw out these bombshells. And yesterday you had Elliot Engel come out and say, oh, well, Ambassador Bolton called me. And you just wonder, there's two more examples. Why Schiff? Why Engel yesterday? Grand strategist Nancy Pelosi, why did she have Gerald Nadler go in there when he's going to insult the U.S. Senate, who's ultimately going to make the vote? Why did she have him go in there and insult them?
Jess?
Jerry Nadler is the head of the Judiciary Committee, has a long, storied career. Nancy Pelosi is a grand strategist, which is how we wiped the floor with Republicans in the 2018 midterms, using her strategy of focusing on health care. There have also been a number of times where Republicans have had to admit that Nancy Pelosi outgamed the president. To your point about the New York Times, that we know what side they're on. The Uranium One scandal and Hillary Clinton's email server scandal both came from the New York Times. Stop saying that it's just a liberal outlet for all of that. In terms of John Bolton, yes, people flip-flop on these things, and one guy looks good one day, and when he's against you, doesn't look as good the next day. There is a strong case to hear from him. You saw Lindsey Graham getting very uncomfortable with the insulting of John Bolton. You heard
I agree with that.
John Kelly, who said, I believe John Bolton, if he's the one who said this. I don't think they're going to get the witnesses, is the truth.
Yeah, well, and again, Lindsey Graham said that yesterday. If you pick on John Bolton too much, you're going to get to the point where everybody wants to hear from that witness.
Right, exactly. And the point Lindsey Graham was making was, you know, let's stipulate that what John Bolton's going to say, is that he wanted to investigate the Bidens, and then he made the very good case, Lindsey Graham did, of why anyone with half a brain would want to investigate what happened with the Bidens when you have Joe Biden controlling money to the Ukraine, saying, you know, the day for corruption in this industry is over. At the exact same second, his son is getting $3 million. That's, you know, undercutting American interest at the interest of your family.
Well, and Kurt Volker had previously said that the president, in his testimony, said that the president had deep-rooted concerns about corruption in Ukraine, which is consistent with what we've also heard from the legal defense team. But look, we've heard from witnesses. There's been 17 witnesses, over 100 hours in testimony. We don't need to hear from anyone else at this point. And I think Representative Lee Stefanik made this point on Twitter today, and she said, hey, look, why won't Democrats release the transcript of the Intelligence Community Inspector General? So Democrats are saying we need to hear from new people, but they haven't even released all the pertinent information from the testimony and the witnesses we've already heard from, or they've already heard from. So why won't they release that? And she says, or at least according to her tweet, what it would confirm is there was a political bias and coordination that took place with the whistleblower. That's what she said in a tweet. So why are they calling for additional witnesses and information when they won't even release what they already have?
I'm glad you're asking that question, because we have some answers here. Let's listen to Senator Barrasso in Durban.
I would go one step further to say, even if everything in Bolton's book happens to be true and everything he testifies to happens to be true, if he happens to be called, I still do not believe that that rises to the level of the impeachable offenses.
They said this manuscript contained top secret information and therefore couldn't be released to the American public. Excuse me if I'm suspicious, but I think the John Bolton manuscript is now in the same desk drawer as the president's tax returns.
So that was the very plain case you saw there in the first soundbite from Senator Barrasso saying, let's just stipulate that everything we think John Bolton is saying is true. I'm still not voting to impeach. And then you have Dick Durbin saying, you know, now it looks quite suspicious that they're saying, oh, his book, all of a sudden there's national security concerns. You can't possibly have it when, I don't know, you have to think Ambassador Bolton knows what a national security concern is and wouldn't have put it in the book, but... Right?
Yeah, I mean, his title was National Security Advisor, so one would hope. By the way, Alan Dershowitz is tweeting quite a bit, and he said, you know, because people are kind of jumping on what he said, he got a different sector of the party started. He said, I did not say or imply that a candidate could do anything to reassure his reelection, only that seeking help in an election is not necessarily corrupt, citing the Lincoln and Obama examples. He doesn't cite them in the tweet, but critics have an obligation to respond to what I said, not to create straw men to attack. Kind of what Lisa was pointing out.
Well, Alan Dershowitz's comments, there is not a single senator in that chamber that is going to think, that might change my opinion. But Jerry Nadler coming in and telling Republicans that they are corrupt has certainly had an impact on Lisa Murkowski and Susan Collins. And so the fundamentals of this haven't changed. There aren't 20 Republicans to vote to convict. And if Joe Biden wasn't running for president, this would never have come up.
Well, right, because the president only cares about corruption in Ukraine, and I put that in quotes, because of Joe Biden, because he's trying to protect his own electoral interests. And that is exactly what Alan Dershowitz said. He said if it's in the national interest, foreign interference is right. Are you comfortable with that, David? Do you think asking a foreign country...
Do you believe the founding fathers set up impeachment over a campaign finance violation?
You think
that's what this is?
You think this is a campaign finance?
Exactly. Then what law is broken?
What law?
What law? That he took aid, that he got help in his election campaign. That is a campaign
put his personal interests over the interests of the nation.
He didn't. You could make the argument, of course, that it is in the national security interest of the country to figure out if another foreign power meddled in our election. It is in our national security interest if a person who is running for president is corrupt. Those are international security interests. Also, look, this is not the first time that aid has been frozen, reviewed, or canceled. The legal team has pointed out several instances, whether you look at Afghanistan, as I mentioned earlier, the Northern Triangle countries. That is not a new concept.
Were any of the people that this would hurt running for president against the president when that aid was frozen?
This didn't hurt Joe Biden.
Jessica, are you kidding me?
Joe Biden
You think
hurt
Joe
Joe
Biden is done in 2 weeks, David? It hasn't hurt Joe Biden.
Whoa.
Said the quiet part out loud. Look at Joni Ernst, and she admitted
I'm going to ask you a question, and then we're going to wrap it up. I'm curious to know, from what you just said about that burden of proof, if you will, on whether or not the president put his interests ahead of the country. Do you think Democrats have proven the point? And do you think that they've proven the point such that when average Americans watch, in between all the things that they're balancing in their lives, they get it? Because polling would suggest perhaps they don't. So maybe you can make the point better than Adam Schiff.
This poll from a few days ago, 51% say that he should be impeached and removed from office. That is consistent with other high-quality polls.
Politics average 47 say impeach and remove, and it's higher than that for not do it.
Okay, well, that is the most recent polling on it. So I think
David Axelrod said he did a focus group with Democratic primary voters. Only 80 minutes in did they mention impeachment.
David Avella, it was great to see you. Thank you, and the rest of the couch here. We turn it over to Brett Baer and Martha McCallum for special coverage of the Senate impeachment trial right now.
This is special coverage of the Senate impeachment trial of President Donald Trump. I'm Martha McCallum in New York City.
And I'm Brett Baer in Washington. Martha, was it something I said? No. Senators heading into their second day of questioning House managers and President Trump's lawyers as some Republicans predict a final vote tomorrow night on removing the president from office.
That would mean a majority of senators voted against new witnesses, such as John Bolton. Republican Senator David Perdue says his GOP colleagues are pushing to end this trial as soon as possible.
Working hard to make it that way. Look, this is shutting the Senate down. We've heard all the evidence now. It's become very repetitive, as you could see last night. It's time to move to a vote on acquittal as soon as possible.
Meanwhile, Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer says he's optimistic that Democrats can still get enough.
We've always said this is an uphill fight. The pressure that Trump, who's a vindictive, nasty president, and McConnell place on them is large, but we're still hopeful.
Congressional correspondent Chad Pergram is live on Capitol Hill with the latest. Chad.
Well, good afternoon. They start again today at 1 o'clock with the second tranche, this 8-hour batch of question and answer session, written questions again. They went to about 11 o'clock last night. We have gone through 93 questions so far. There were only 106 questions posed in President Clinton's trial in 1999, so they're going to, bypass that by a large number later today. But the big question is, when does this wrap up? And tomorrow night there's going to be a seminal vote, what we're calling here a gateway vote. Do they vote to have witnesses or not? Now, to be clear, this is not an individual vote on calling witnesses by name. It's just the idea. That's going to be key. And this is something that came up on the Senate floor during the Q&A last night. Here's the President's defense counsel, Jay Sekulow.
By the way, if we get anybody we want, we will be here for a very long time. To say that this is not going to extend this proceeding, months. Because understand something else. Despite the, executive privilege and other nonsense, I suspect Manager Schiff, smart guy, he's going to say, wait a minute, I got some speech and debate privileges that may be applicable to this.
Lead impeachment manager Adam Schiff says the President's defense counsel is trying to scare senators, saying that calling witnesses will consume the Senate, paralyzing it. Schiff believes this is a hollow threat.
It's not going to take months of litigation, although that's what the President's counsel is threatening. They're doing the same thing to the Senate they did to the House, which is you try to investigate the President, you try to try the President, we will tie you and your entire chamber up in knots for weeks and months.
Now, there are three scenarios that are in play. Let's say they get to that gateway vote tomorrow night and they reject it. They reject the concept of calling witnesses. What that means is you could have final arguments, perhaps even speeches by senators, and then go to a final judgment. Votes up or down on the impeachment articles, guilty or innocent, late tomorrow night or in the wee hours of Saturday morning. Scenario B is maybe senators actually vote to go down that roadway of conceptually having witnesses or calling documents. Then you could have maybe some horse trading between the two Senate leaders, Mitch McConnell and Chuck Schumer, trying to put out this fire, maybe saying, okay, let's put forth slates of witnesses that we know are unpalatable to the other side. There's pressure on both McConnell and Schumer to wrap this up quick. McConnell, obviously the president, and loyal Republicans to the president, they want this over very fast. For Chuck Schumer, he has Democratic senators running for president who want to go back and campaign in Iowa. And by the way, if you really talk to Democratic senators in private, obviously they want witnesses, but they will tell you that they think it is to their political advantage not to have witnesses so they can boomerang this around on Republican senators in the fall. And then there's scenario C. This is kind of the, Katie bar the door scenario here, where you could have a situation they vote for witnesses, that gateway vote, and then they vote individually by name to call certain witnesses. Now, what would happen is you would probably have the trial go dark for probably a week or two, as according to the framework for the trial, they would depose these witnesses in private. It would obviously take time to get them in. The Senate would be doing other business. That would be going on off stage, and then the Senate would probably come back into session with the trial and determine if they needed to have those witnesses testify on the Senate floor in open session. Those are the three scenarios. However, we don't think that choose your own adventure scenario will come to pass. The reason is that Mitch McConnell, as the majority leader, he has the right of recognition on the floor. He gets recognized first, so he can control this a little bit and try to maybe create a creative scenario where he puts this to bed sometime late on Friday or early in the day on Saturday. Brett and Martha?
We may need a whiteboard, Chad, for all of those scenarios. But you and I have talked to people up there on the Hill in the McConnell sphere, and there is a growing confidence that he has the votes to prevent witnesses and thereby has the votes to acquit. But it's still not locked down. Everybody also is still buzzing about this tie vote in any of these scenarios you talked about. A tie. That's still in play?
Yeah, exactly. I talked to one very good vote counter up here. They thought that gateway vote would fail, and they said it might fail even on a tie. Now, by rule, a tie vote fails in the Senate. What usually happens in the Senate if there is a tie vote and the vice president presides, if the issue goes the way the administration wants it to go, then the vice president doesn't vote. The vice president only breaks a tie if they want the vote to go a certain way, and then the vote's 51-50. But during a Senate trial, you have the Chief Justice presiding. In the Senate trial of President Andrew Johnson in 1868, there were three ties, and the Chief Justice, Salmon P. Chase, asserted himself, broke two of the three ties. But I keep being told repeatedly that we don't think that Chief Justice Roberts will break a tie here. And so if you have a 50-50 vote, guess what? That resolution is defeated, and that could cut this off at the pass tomorrow night. Brett, Martha?
Tie goes to the runner. Chad, thanks.
So our all-star panel is with us, anchor of the Daily Briefing and co-host of The Five, Dana Perino, co-host of The Five and Fox News political analyst Juan Williams, former assistant U.S. attorney and former federal prosecutor Andy McCarthy, also Fox News contributor, town hall editor and Fox News contributor Katie Pavlich, and Fox News politics editor and host of the I Tell You What podcast, Chris Direwalt, is with us as well. Thank you all for being here this morning. Dana, I want to start with you. When you look at the possibility of how this works out politically in the end and whether or not there are, as one person said earlier today, the possibility that more Democrats could vote to acquit the president than Republicans vote to have witnesses. And that certainly would be, I guess, a win for the Republican side on this in the end.
Certainly, if you have a bipartisan acquittal, then I think obviously the Republicans and President Trump himself would say that that was a big win for them. But even if it's split on a party line vote and you get acquittal, it's still acquittal. However, I think you see that the Democrats are already realizing what they knew was going to happen, which was acquittal in the end, because Speaker Pelosi and Chairman Schiff, and amongst that, acquittal is not legitimate if the Senate doesn't supplement the House's work with new witnesses. So they're basically saying it's not a real trial if you don't have these new witnesses, so therefore your acquittal will be illegitimate anyway. And I imagine that that's probably what they're going to try to start shaping this, because they want to try to get ahead of what's going to happen, which is that they're going to lose on that. I also heard that the Republicans, they're going to hold their cards close to their chest, but feel like they're moving in the right direction. For a lot of the fence sitters, one of the things that they're trying to deal with right now is this idea, even if you heard from John Bolton, and even if he said that the president was tying aid to investigations into the Bidens, that wouldn't be a crime and therefore not impeachable. And then one other thing that you hear amongst the Senate Republicans is that, the House did not complete its work. It was incomplete. So what kind of a precedent does it set to allow this to go forward And then in the future, you could just have the House do kind of a half-baked impeachment and send it over the Senate and put the onus on them. The last point I would make is Senator Alexander of Tennessee was considered somebody who might be a fence sitter. Note that he has not asked a single question in all of those hours yesterday. I think that signals that he probably feels pretty comfortable that he has all the information that he needs.
And as we talked about, he's pretty loyal to Senator Mitch McConnell, good friends, and usually follows the path that McConnell sets. Andy McCarthy, Adam Schiff, other Democrats hopping on Alan Dershowitz's argument yesterday, calling it this morning a normalization of lawlessness. And the message they're sending is that a fair trial